Okay, so welcome back. So now let's go on and let's shade our main explosion. And we're going to start this by using some of the similar settings we have for other fluids. So let's go to a frame. I picked frame 100, and this is going to be a frame with a lot of bright fire. And then after we get this looking half decent, then let's skip ahead to maybe the end of the sequence, frame 150, where there's going to be less fire and more smoke, and then there we can just see how our settings will translate towards the end of the simulation. So if we bring up our Arnold render view, let's go in and start an IPR. So we can see here that it's already looking quite bright, and so I'm just going to go in and change a couple of the settings like we had before. Now, as I mentioned before, it's kind of all about giving compositors more information to work with. So if we blow this out like super hot and white and with the fire, then the compositors aren't going to have any information to work with themselves. So the best thing to do is just to give them more of a range of values to work with. So I'm going to turn the temperature back down to 7. And you can see all the color we're getting back here and a bit more of the detail. And the minimum temp, again, I'm going to put up to 1200. And let's keep the fire smoke blend at 500. And we'll keep the opacity at 1. Now we just want to make sure we have bright enough areas in the middle, so I'm just going to up the intensity to 2. And then we got some nice hot whites and some nice bright yellows and going into some thick smoke. So I'm liking that. And now let's go into the indirect pass. And we can see the indirect is looking pretty great, but maybe it's a bit not bright enough. So we can probably get more information out of this if we boost it up again. So let's take this up again to what we had before in our other fluids. So 25. Now we got a big range of values that we can use more efficiently. So I'm going to increase the sharpening to what we had before as well, at 2 and 0.5. And for this, we're going to have to update our render scene for the sharpening parameters to take effect. So let's go render update full scene. And there we go. So we can see how much the indirect illumination is scattering through the entire fluid. So if we wanted to, once we have the brightness of our scattering itself, and we want it to appear more thick, we can also go down into this Arnold tab down below here, and we can modify the attenuation of the global illumination. So if we were to put this up to 2, it's going to attenuate twice as much, although it's still going to be as bright as we had it before in the brighter areas. So playing with this value, we can determine where we want it to kind of die off to get the most effective results in our pass. But for this, I'm going to leave it at 1. I'm liking how evenly it's dying out towards the end. We've also got this option, the phase function anisotropy. And this is a positive number and a negative number will determine where the light appears to be being scattered. So if you think of something like a cloud behind, in front of the sun, that would have an anisotropy of, say, like 0.5. And if we did a negative value, it would appear as if the sun's scattering in front of it. So if we have lights behind the fluid, in front of the fluid, we can create nice little rim effects in that if we wanted to. But I'm going to keep this at 0 and the attenuation at 1. So also we want to make sure that we're using the color channel of our smoke. So let's go into the direct pass and take a look. And just to confirm that we are using the grid color smoke, which is going to be the colors that we simulated off our particles. So that's all looking pretty great. So now I'm going to skip ahead to frame 150, and let's take a look at our render at 150. So here we can see at the end of the sequence, it's looking pretty great. The fire cools down to the nice billowing smoke, and we can see the colors of the smoke here. So it looks like we're going to have a great render from a hot white explosion, and it's going to cool off really nicely. So with this in mind, I'm going to put all this on a render layer, and let's render this out. So first of all, what we're going to need to do is let's turn on motion blur for all the fluids, and to do that, we're going to go into the render settings, general parameters, and here we have to make sure motion blur is turned on for all of these fluids. So let's just select this for all our other fluids as well. And finally, let's add this into a render layer. So if you're using my 2017, they have a new render layer system. And if you go into the rendering settings, the preferred render system setup might be on render setup. And that's the new render system. So I'm actually going to use the old legacy render because that's what I'm comfortable with. So just in case you weren't sure how to get back to the classic render setup. So now I'm just going to add in all my objects. Let's add this into a layer. Let's call this explosion. And let's make some adjustments to our render settings here. So I'm going to increase the volume indirect samples to 8. And you'll see this is going to drastically increase my render time, but the indirect passes really need it. I think even this value might not be enough. And let's increase the samples to the camera samples to 6. And let's increase the diffuse to 3. And let's turn on motion blur. Although since we're panning by so fast, I'm going to make sure this is on a 0.5 value because there is quite a lot of motion in the camera as well. And I'm going to turn up the keys just to make it a bit smoother. So 5. So with these settings, because I'm limited to, I don't have a render farm, this render took me almost a full week to render with these indirect passes. So it's quite a long time, and you'll see in the Finder render it still isn't quite good enough quality, but with my limited time, this is as much that I could push my one machine. So with the render farm, you might want to increase this further.